Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or as it is called here in the States, the Sorcerer's Stone, was released back in 2001 and was directed by Chris Columbus and based on the book by J.K. Rowling. It stars Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson, among some of Britain's finest actors, and it follows Harry Potter, an orphan who enrolls in a school of wizardry where he learns the truth about himself, his family, and the terrible evil that haunts the magical world. I've been a huge Harry Potter fan ever since I can remember, and I've always said I don't know what the first film I ever saw in theaters was, but I know the first film I remember seeing in theaters, and that belongs to the very film we're talking about today. This has always been a very special film to me. I watched it a lot as a kid, and it's what got me into the book series I still hold near and dear to my heart. It was a series I grew up with, and it was always something special getting to see it unfold through the years in both the books and the films. Now, here we are 22 years later to look at it once again and see if it holds up like it did for me as a child. And that answer is pretty easy to answer. It's an astounding yes. But before we talk about that, I do want to mention first that I did review this film a few years ago already, and I even have to admit I was a bit harsh in that initial review. And my original thoughts in that review no longer stand, which is another reason why I wanted to revisit this film now. I also know that I was nearly done reviewing this series only last year, but I just wasn't satisfied with my reviews at the time and wanted to start completely fresh. So for the next 8 months, I plan to review a Harry Potter film once per month until we finally make it through all 8 films and I can finally rest at ease. Also, I will not be spending too much time in this review series talking about J.K. Rowling. Yes, she's a controversial figure, and I do not agree with her stance on issues towards the LGBTQ+ community, but I can still love the work, the craft, the story being told. So with that out of the way, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes into the making of this film. Back in 1997, David Heyman, a producer at Heyday Films, opted to produce a series of films based on the popular book series. He pitched the idea to Warner Brothers, which were taken by the idea, and soon Rowling had sold the rights to the first 4 books, which she was reluctant to do at first, learning she was giving away control of her story. Several directors were considered for the chance to direct the film, with Steven Spielberg being one of the first. However, his idea conflicted with a lot of Rowling's own demands. He wanted the film to be animated and combine elements from later books into one film, and controversially cast American actor Haley Joel Osment as Harry Potter instead of an English actor. After negotiations with Spielberg fell through, other directors considered included Terry Gilliam, Wolfgang Peterson, and Peter Weir. However, the man who would eventually get the job was Chris Columbus, who had a real passion for the project, writing his own spec script for the first film and presenting it to Warner Brothers during his pitch meeting with them. Ultimately, they hired him after being impressed with several of his other outings in the children film genre, such as Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire. The inspirations for the film would ultimately be the works of director David Lean, such as Great Expectations and Oliver Twist, whereas the look of the film would be inspired by films such as the musical Oliver and, interestingly enough, The Godfather. Writing duties went to Steve Kloves, who would go on to adapt 7 of the 8 films, but found his first job of adapting the first book to be a difficult one, since the first book did not lend itself to adaptation as well as the later books. The cast for the film was kept strictly British, and casting itself was overseen by Columbus and Rowling. Some fan favorites of Rowling's, including Maggie Smith and Robbie Coltrane, were cast as McGonagall and Hagrid, and newcomers Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson were cast as the main trio. The rest of the cast was filled with relative unknowns for the children, and some of Britain's finest talent in the adult roles. Filming stayed in England, and the film started production September 29th, 2000, before concluding March 23rd, 2001. For many of the interiors and exteriors of the castle, Chris Columbus shot on location using schools and cathedrals to bring Hogwarts to life. Small things that occurred throughout the production included different takes of the cast saying Sorcerer's Stone instead of Philosopher's Stone for American audiences, Daniel Radcliffe keeping his natural blue eyes instead of green like in the books due to the irritation caused by the contacts, and Emma Watson removing her book-accurate buck teeth. Lastly, John Williams was hired to create the score for the film, which has now become iconic and may very well be Williams' best soundtrack to date. The score for Sorcerer's Stone and its sequel have since far outshone the music from the later films due to their melodic nature and singability. There's a very good video series that talks about the music to the Harry Potter films that goes into far more detail than I ever could about how special this film's music really is, so I'll provide a link for it here. Sorcerer's Stone is an adaptation and as such had to make changes to the source material where it was needed to ensure a smooth theatrical experience. That resulted in the removal of several book characters, rearranging of events, and added bits of dialogue, which were all approved by J.K. Rowling. One of the more famous removals was that of actor Rick Mayall as Peeves, the poltergeist. Since then, Chris Columbus has had interest in returning to the editing room for the film and adding about half an hour's worth of material, including the cut Peeves scenes, but nothing on this has moved forward. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about my actual thoughts on the film. After rewatching this film just the other day, I might have to now change my opinion on what I think my favorite Harry Potter film is. I've always been a big fan of both Prisoner of Azkaban, which is typically considered the best of the films, but I've always had a soft spot for one of the lesser-loved films, Order of the Phoenix, which I still believe to be the best adaptation, which might be a controversial opinion for some, but regardless, I think I now have to say Sorcerer's Stone is my favorite of these movies. And I don't think it's just a good film, but I think it's a great film and one of the best children's films ever made. Rewatching the film, you can just see the talent, the love, and the sweat and tears that went into the making of the film. Chris Columbus and his team clearly had a lot of respect and love for the source material, and it shows. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is unlike most other children's films and has more in common with cinema from the 1970s than anything. It really feels like the films I briefly mentioned in my behind-the-scenes section, such as Oliver and The Godfather. I have to praise the cinematography and art direction on this film. John Seal is a wonderful cinematographer and is really able to capture beautiful shots filled with light and color. The film also just has a magical look that gets lost in the later films and has never been able to be recaptured. The wizarding world feels alive and whimsical and filled with life. Locations and set decoration have so much color and character to them, whether it's the cobbled stone streets of Diagon Alley, or Ollivander's Wand Shop, or one of the many Hogwarts locations. You feel transported to that world. The costuming is beautiful as well. Judiana Makovitsky is a name I don't hear a lot, but she has made quite the career out of being a costume designer, and I still think the film may very well be her best work to date. Every look is instantly iconic and beautiful. The way fabrics shimmer and look on screen is just stunning. I could spend all day talking about the look of this film and how magical everything feels, but let's move on to talking about the cast. Right off the bat, I think this is one of the best casted films I've ever seen for an adaptation. Everyone not only looks the part, but feels the part as well. Robbie Coltrane, Maggie Smith, and Richard Harris as Rubeus Hagrid, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Dumbledore look like they were pulled right from the pages of the book. The young cast also very much looks the part. Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson are absolute magic as the iconic trio and work so well together that they feel like lifelong friends. Rewatching the film now, I am made aware of some of the awkward line deliveries by the younger cast, but I still think they do a more than capable job, and their acting would improve as this series continued. I think having some of the greatest British actors of the time playing many of these iconic characters helps in balancing some of the rougher, younger performances, but nonetheless, I think the performances they give are still good, especially Daniel Radcliffe as the titular main character, who gives an innocent yet vulnerable performance that makes the character of Harry instantly likable. The film is also made up of so many iconic moments that were also present in the book, but through the visual medium of film, these scenes have quickly become part of the public consciousness, whether it's the iconic opening of Dumbledore leaving Harry with the Dursleys, or Hagrid's entrance, the introduction of Diagon Alley, the Quidditch match, the encounter with the troll, the final confrontation with Quirrell. Everything in it is so well executed, it makes for a very memorable movie. However, despite the film being lighter in tone than later films, I still feel like it has some great moments of darkness that in some ways even outmatches the darker moments in later films. The film is whimsy and childlike, but moments such as Hagrid telling Harry about the night his parents died, or Harry's encounter with Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, don't shy away from being scary. There's this moment in the Forbidden Forest in particular that I had only noticed a few years ago where Harry looks into the darkness and you can clearly see a hooded figure walking in the forest. But he's so hard to see, the moment can be completely missable. However, some of my favorite moments in this film don't even come from those big moments, but the quieter parts of the film. I already mentioned the opening scene with Dumbledore leaving Harry on the doorstep. That scene is handled so perfectly. It leaves you with mystery and sadness as well. Then you have moments such as Harry just sitting in the leaky cauldron, waiting to ask Hagrid about Voldemort. Moments like these are handled with such seriousness and reverence, it pulls you in. But my favorite moment in the film, which just so happens to be my favorite moment of the book, is when Harry happens upon the Mirror of Erised and discusses it with Dumbledore. It showcases in this very scene the desires every man or woman wants in life. However, we also see that we can't just waste away and forget about our own lives in the hopes of having what we desire in the mirror. We have to ultimately act. Harry has no family, at least a family that actually cares about him, but it's while at Hogwarts, the friends he makes, the people he meets, he realizes he does have a home and a family. Maybe not in the conventional sense, but it's all he needs. And I think realizes he doesn't need the mirror because he has everything he could need already with him. And so in the final scene of the movie, when he says that he's not really going home, he means exactly that. The Muggle world, the world of the Dursleys, isn't his home. It's the wizarding world, Hogwarts, the place where his true family really resides. It would also be a complete disservice to this film if I didn't at least mention John Williams' iconic score. As far as I'm concerned, this is the best score he's ever done. Every track is memorable, singable, and adds so much emotion to the film, whether he's trying to establish intrigue, mystery, humor, sadness, horror, or triumph. Williams' score is able to do all of these things, and it adds to the magic that these first few films in this franchise have that isn't at all present in the later films. The ending of this film has the absolute best use of the Leaving Hogwarts theme and adds a triumphant but bittersweet nature to this wonderful film. And as later films would come out, the composer for the films would change. None of the music can compare to what was done at the very beginning. And I feel as if the makers of these films knew this, especially since barely any of the music present in the first two films composed by Williams show up in later films, aside for the Hedwig's theme, which is now the anthem of the entire series. But the theme of the final scene of this movie does return in the final film in this franchise, and with that, we are reminded of the past and the moments we spent watching this film, the place where it all started. I love this film. I think it's a great mystery, filled with interesting and fun characters, and establishes a world that so many of us have become engrossed in for many, many years. It's not only a stellar adaptation, but just a good film in general that's beautifully filmed and has one of the best soundtracks for any movie, period. And though some performances from the younger cast are weaker, and even some development of certain villains, such as Professor Quirrell, are not explored all too well, I still think this is a perfect movie, and one of the best children's films and best fantasy films ever made. So with all that said, I'm going to give Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone a 9 out of 10. Well guys, I want to thank you once again for checking out this review. I'm very glad I decided to revisit this film and talk a bit more about things I love in it and make up for my previous review I did a few years ago. This really is a special film to me because it was one of the first movies I saw in the theater. But even with childhood nostalgia and the love I have for the books and this franchise, I still think this is a great movie that I will continue to love. But anyway, what do you guys think about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone? Let me know. I have one more movie I'd like to review before the end of this month, so look forward to that review coming next week. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And stay positive.